My name is Enwashima, and I am a career ambassador. I'm working for the CCD, and today I am with Nobel. Nobel, would you mind introducing yourself, just your name, college, major, graduation, all of that?
Hi, I'm Nobel. I recently graduated Boston University this May. I was an English major and a deaf studies minor, and now I'm working as a teacher.
Perfect. That is very interesting. You said you're working as a teacher, so what are some things you do on a day-to-day basis as a teacher?
I work as an associate teacher, which is not a lead, so I'm assisting. So a lot of what I do is a support in the classroom. I support kids who have trouble. I support their transitions, and I'm basically in the classroom doing everything the lead teacher does, but like a secondary role, which includes like grading papers, making sure everyone's on task, planning lessons, and all of that stuff, basically.
Yeah, and you said that you just graduated recently. So it's quite fresh, like the BU experience. What experience was the most valuable to you in college, and what would you say was the biggest takeaway you had from it?
Well, just in general, the biggest takeaway from college was definitely the increased independence. So coming off of high school and for me, it was a huge move. I come from the other side of the world, so coming to BU was like a really huge move. And so learning how to be independent, learning like how to manage my time properly, and learning self-motivation as well. In college, there's not a lot of incentives. Well, people are supporting you, but they're not directly being like, oh, if you don't do your homework, someone's not walking you through that. So definitely in college, like the biggest takeaway was like learning how to be self-motivated, learning how to manage your time properly by yourself. And I would say one of like the most useful things at BU was definitely my job as a career ambassador as well. So having an on-campus job definitely taught me how to manage my time. Like I had to budget my time between working as well as doing homework, as well as going to classes, as well as doing whatever I want with my friends. So having all of those commitments really forced me to understand how to budget my time, what was more important, and especially how to prioritize, which is an incredibly important skill in a workplace which is highly demanding. So in my workplace, I have to do maybe 1,000 things a day, but learning how to prioritize, learning what's the most important thing to do right now is an important skill that I think college, especially because you have no one to tell you what's the most important thing, it's a skill that like is easily developed in college.
No, yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. I feel like time management is a thing that I really struggled with in the beginning, and I feel like I'm improving on it just because I'm in college, like as you said, balancing coursework and then also like social life and work, as you mentioned. So it's definitely a very important skill to gain. Um, and you mentioned that you studied English and Deaf Studies, so more the humanities route. Um, do you think the coursework you completed at BU is directly applicable to your current position? And if not, what would you recommend students do to prepare for a position, for example, as a teacher?
So that's a really interesting question, particularly because as you can tell, like I'm actually teaching. I'm not even teaching English. I'm teaching math. I was just placed there. So technically, my coursework is not directly related. I'm not teaching the kids about 19th century English literature. Definitely not. However, I will say that for any humanities majors, especially those, because a lot of humanities majors will go into jobs that aren't directly related to their field. You can learn history, but end up being a lawyer or something like that. That's very, very common. Humanities is way, way more about the skill sets that you learn during your classes than about the actual concrete knowledge. So I would never say don't take a humanities major. Like that's like I love the humanities. It was a great course. It's about knowing what is actually useful from your humanities major when you're going to work. So as I said, the skill set. So for me, it was communication. I had done so much writing and like so much verbalizing in classes that I'm really, really good at explaining difficult concepts. And that is one of the most important things a teacher does, explain difficult concepts. So that is it. Like absolutely a skill that I took directly from my major. It may not have been exactly like outlined in the coursework, but it definitely was something that my major prepared me for. And then my minor in deaf studies. So I work at a school that is primarily serving underprivileged as well as Black and Brown students. So a lot of our work is decoding privilege and decoding power struggles. That is directly also something I studied in deaf studies. We learned a lot about power dynamics and oppression. And so actually my coursework in that sense did directly lead into my ability to succeed in this kind of work with these kind of people. So like even stuff that you think is not important, like the theory behind diversity and equity, for example, like a lot of people will be like, how could you use that in a job? Well, actually, it's extremely useful depending on what field you're going to. So my advice for anyone who like is like, what does my major have to do with anything? I don't need to pay attention in class. I'm like, yes, you do, because you never know when it will come in handy. And like deaf studies, I learned ASL. That's not directly related to my job right now, but that extra language would probably get me a pay raise like 2 years down in the future. So definitely taking the opportunity, learn everything you're interested in, learn what you like, because you never know when it will pop up again. And even if you think it's not like immediately, it's not obvious, there are skill sets that you are using that will definitely be important when you're applying for jobs.
No, I think that's very valuable. I think it's very difficult for a lot of students in the humanities. One of my majors is psychology, for example, and I know I struggled a lot with it in the beginning because I was like, what assigned role does this have? You know, like what can I actually do with just a undergraduate degree in psychology? And I think it's really important to understand that, you have different career paths and it's fine if it doesn't fit in one box. Like, I think sometimes we also compare ourselves and we're like, oh, they studied engineering, they're going to be an engineer, or oh,
Yes,
they studied
exactly.
that, they're going to be that. But I think it's important to realize that, once again, if you're in the humanities and maybe currently in a position or situation where you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Does this like even fit? To understand that there's like a role for anyone and the different skill sets that we gain also matter as well. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. And speaking about work and, transitioning, how was your transition from school to working full time? And do you think BU prepared you for that transition?
That is also an interesting question. I definitely think, um, especially towards my last 2 years, especially when I started, like, not just saying this because we're on like the CCD, but especially when I got more involved in the CCD, I started to learn a lot more about work life, and especially those panels where you could hear from people who were actually working. That really, so because before that I had no clue, I was just sort of going off of like social media and guesses, but actually talking directly to people who were at work, or my friends who had graduated early directly telling me, I found that the direct feedback from people who had just graduated or like in their first year of working was the most useful to me for understanding how to transition. As for like my transition itself, it was interesting. Like, I'll be honest, college sometimes, because it's like very free, you have a lot of free time, it is a hard transition back into like every day you're doing something from 9 to 5. During my first 2 weeks or so, it was definitely rough. Like, I remember being like, I can't do this for 70 years. Like, I really do not want to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm a little still like that, like, still like, how do I get through this? But really, it was first of all, talking to other people who've been through the transition. Like almost everyone I talked to had that experience. There is a point in like the first month or even the first year where you're like, I hate this. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. But you get through it and you learn how to like what to value in like your job. Especially, you should probably like your job, but definitely there are moments of enjoyment that really make the whole thing worth it. And I'd say, as for my experiences in BU in particular, also being in a setting where there's a lot of people with different trajectories and different ambitions, and just like seeing, like hearing other people from BU, what they're doing, how they're feeling, that really helps with the transition. I think there's two major difficulties in the transition. One is just the literal physical aspect of it, like going to do something every day for a long period of time, which most college students like. College is a completely different experience. You have a lot more freedom. And the second is like just emotionally, a lot of people in their first year or month are like, is this actually right for me? Did I choose the right path? Do I want to quit right away? Like, that's a huge thing. And just for me, definitely listening to other people, hearing other people's experiences helped me through that sort of period where I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know if I want to do this even for another day, but it's all good now. So definitely it's a rough transition, but yeah, it's survivable.
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say we talked about your transition into the workspace, but we didn't talk about how you got your job. So would you mind sharing with us how you got your position? How did you apply for it?
So actually, so I applied rather late. I am a humanities major. It's like for a lot of people, I would recommend applying early, but I applied in like March of my final semester. There's a lot of reasons for why I started so late. First of all, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to grad school or I wanted to go to a job. So I was actually maybe the most indecisive person ever. So I really did not know what I was doing. So when I started to do job search, it was already kind of late, and that really stressed me out. However, a lot of people have different job trajectories, and the fact that a lot of people get jobs after they graduate really like comforted me because I was like, it's not actually the graduation date is not a deadline. Like a lot of people think, oh, I need to have a job by graduation. That's not true. Like you can get a job after graduation. That's totally fine. But so I knew sort of what I wanted to do. I again wasn't sure, but I was like, I kind of enjoy teaching, and I definitely enjoy diversity and equity and inclusion, which was like an interest of mine that flourished in college. So in BU, doing a lot of different stuff like my clubs as well as my on-campus job helped me realize that I wanted to do something related to diversity. So I looked on idealist.org. So that was the website that I used. It's a website which has job listings for nonprofits specifically. And so I think I filtered like education and then something that accepts English majors because did want to use my major. And then I found the job that I'm working for right now. Yeah, so I applied to it and then I got through the first interview stage. And so for the interview stage, I used a lot of the tips on the CCD website. Like I prepared really in advance. I had questions. But then I thought it actually went terribly. So I wasn't really sure after the first interview. And they took so long to get back to me. So I was like, oh, that's it. I didn't get it. But then I was invited for the second interview, which was in person. And that went really well. So that's eventually how I got my job. So I really think using the career resources, like I actually use them like every step of the way. And the website, idealist.org, I found that through like Handshake or something. Like there was like a list that was like, these are website job listings. And without that website, I don't know if I'd have found this job because it's hard on websites like LinkedIn to find specific things. I think going to specialized website is actually really useful if you know what field or what like area you want to go to. And then I would say, yeah, definitely knowing your interests, like knowing what you are interested in is a great step to just even that first level of okay, but what website do I use, like knowing what you really want to do. So as I said, because I was interested in DEI, I chose a website that was DEI focused.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I think it's really valuable to kind of find the right sources, and sometimes it could also just be something you would never expect.
Yes,
Like you
that's
could be
true.
searching and you're like, oh wait, I could actually find a job here. I didn't know that. So I think that's definitely valuable for students. And you did talk about the fact that you were generally struggling with the idea of getting a job after college just because of so many options like grad school. And you did mention that you're from, across the world. Um,
Yeah.
and so you were an international student. And I know a lot of students at BU can relate to the stress and struggle of being an international student. And how did that aspect of your personal life affect your job search?
Okay, so yeah, so I'm from Hong Kong, which is the other side of the world. So I am not an American citizen, and that 100% for any international students watching is a rough. It's hard to get a job as an international student. Not going to sugarcoat it. You have to look for jobs that will sponsor you or like for the first year, you don't need a sponsor, but generally you want to have like a long-term plan. So definitely as an international student, a huge thing for me was, do I think I have a future at this job? Your first year should be at a company that you think will hire you back. So when I was looking for my jobs, I was looking for, is this long term? Is this like only 1 year and then most people quit? That's definitely a huge consideration. So the job I'm at right now, in that job listing, it said like there was an advancement, there was like a promotional scheme, and I was like, okay, if they have that thing, then it seems like it's long term. That was a huge factor in why I applied to it. And then secondly, you do have to be upfront about your immigration status. That is quite difficult. So I would say, in your application, you don't need to mention it unless they ask you, do you have a work visa? You'd have to be honest, like never lie. There's no point. You just waste your time if you're lying. But definitely, in your final interview or even in your like a second interview, explicitly mention that you're an international student, because if you're at the second interview stage, they probably already like you enough and they'll probably hire you, but you do not want to get hired and then have them figure out later that you were lying. That's definitely the worst case scenario. But you also don't want to restrict yourself too much by putting it in your application. So choosing the best time to mention your immigration status and your work visa is like really important as well. I would say like in a second interview, because if there's no point in mentioning in a first interview because you might not even advance. So second interview, or if there's only one interview in that first interview, mentioning it. And then also obviously I think there's other considerations too. One thing I found is that I'm really homesick sometimes, even more so than I was in college. Because in college, I was basically like, oh, I'm going to go back during breaks. I'm going to go back during summer. But working, you're kind of not sure if you'll ever go back or like if you'll, when you will go back. So kind of preparing yourself for that sort of homesickness, like a different level, I find, than college. Like in college, I was still like, oh, I'm going to go back to my family in a few months. But when you're starting your job, it's definitely different. So that's like an emotional, not a legal side of being an international student.
No, definitely. I think also talking about the emotional is very important. Like, I feel like people underestimate the stress that international students go through. It's very stressful, the idea that you potentially could not be able to stay here or get a job, even though you might really want it. Or
Yes.
let's say you're a really good candidate, but you don't get offered the position just because of your like where you were born and like where you're from. Um,
Mhm.
I also can relate to that to some certain extent. Like I also live abroad, and for me, it's kind of a joke in the family where, like, currently right now that we're in college, I'm, they're like, oh, you're half of the year in the US, but you're half of the year here just because of all the breaks that we have, and they're quite long as well, like summer break and then winter break. And then I'm like, yeah, I know, it doesn't even feel like I'm gone for that long, like whenever I go back. So I feel like the idea of staying in one place for a very long amount of time without those breaks, without getting the chance to like book a ticket back home, is definitely something to consider and something that can, affect you and like homesickness as well. I was also going to ask if you just have any general tips that you would like to give students. All the advice you gave until now was very, very useful. Just asking if you have any additional things that you would want to share.
For international students in particular, get started on the OPT process as early as possible. So I didn't start as early as possible and it was fine. However, even for me, this year they had a delay in like the creation of cards. So that sort of stuff, like you cannot plan for that stuff. It's just gonna happen. And that's unfortunate. So as early as possible, applying for all the paperwork. It takes like it's supposed to take 2 months. It took mine exact over 3 months, and for some people longer than that. So definitely try your best to do stuff early on, and this applies to other people as well. As I said, you do not have to have everything prepared before you graduate, especially if you're like me and very indecisive. But you should at least have a general, like, try to have some time to think about what you like doing. And a piece of advice a big piece of advice I have is, if you don't know what field you want to go to, think about just literally what stuff you like doing. So for me, I realized what I love most is person to person interaction. I love talking to people. I love helping people. That's a general thing. It's not related to one job, but it meant like I'm not going to take a job where I'm going to be in a cubicle the whole day. That's not for me. I'm also not going to take a job that I feel isn't helpful. Not going to list any jobs right now, but like if I think a job is unethical or like I think I would hate that. So knowing your values, like knowing what you value, is sometimes even more important than knowing what fields you want to go to. You might want to be an engineer, but there are certain engineering jobs that will be more suited to you than others. So definitely finding out what you value is a huge, huge thing. And just it will make a world of difference in your job search as well as how happy you are at your job if they align with what you value. Like you can get through all the hours and get through all the grind as long as you feel, I think, like your job is suited to you. So that would be my number one advice for everyone.
Thank you. Um, Now we're going to shift slightly to networking questions, as it is a really important part of, finding your career, navigating that aspect of everything. Networking plays a huge role in it. How did you yourself begin networking and expanding your network?
So I like networking was always really scary to me. I really didn't like the idea. In fact, I didn't have a LinkedIn until like my junior year. So I was pretty behind on that. However, once I started like so basically it was through like my connection with the CCD that I started networking because um yeah, the CCD was always like, you have to network. So I was like, okay, I'll try doing that for once. I'm actually going to try it. So actually, I think it was really beneficial. There are lots and lots of benefits to networking, but it's not just like, first of all, you can get a job through networking. But second of all, it's like really nice to meet people and understand their experiences. So, for example, when I first started networking, I was actually networking for grad school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So, networking for grad school looks like, making friends with your professors, which definitely go to office hours. Like just go to office hours. It's just a typical advice. But first of all, office hours are fun when you're the only person there. And second of all, it is a really good relationship builder with your professors. And then second of all, like networking with grad students. So when I was in junior and senior year, I was taking grad level courses. A lot of people do that. I would recommend doing that in general, but also talking to the PhD students. I had an informational session, which is where you just sit down and talk about, it's not an interview, it's just you talk about their experiences and get information from them. So I had an informational session with a PhD student. That's how I figured out I do not want to go to do a PhD. So a lot of people don't realize that networking is also to figure out what you're not going to do in the future. Like it's not always about like figuring out the right thing. It's also figuring out like, no, actually, that's not what I wanted to do. And then other ways that you have to network. So if you have a job, so I built a really good relationship. I worked at a summer camp over in Hong Kong for like 3 summers in a row, and I built a really good relationship with my boss. So building a good relationship with your boss kind of looks like taking the time to ask about their day and stuff. And we actually had lunch like outside of work, so building that relationship made it really easy for me. I asked her for recommendations and like it, including for the job I'm at now. And so obviously that worked somehow, but definitely remember that you need recommendations for a lot of jobs that you're going to do, especially if you're going to the grad level. So grad programs as well as most careers. So building a good relationship with any supervisor or boss you have is really important. That doesn't just mean doing all the work that's assigned to you. That kind of means taking the time to talk to them, talking about your future interests with them. A lot of people are super, super willing to help. They all love to help. Like you just don't be afraid to ask for that help. Say, I'm looking for this job in your field. Are you willing to help me get there? Or what advice do you have for me? People love talking about their advice. Like that's what I'm doing right now. So definitely networking is not as scary once you realize that people love to network, and they're just waiting for you to make the first move. So that's the thing. And I never really got into LinkedIn networking, but I did in my second 2 years of college start using LinkedIn more extensively. So LinkedIn is also a great platform because you can get to see people's trajectories on that website, and you can direct message people, obviously, like messaging people who are in the company that you're interviewing for and being like, could you give me some tips and stuff is definitely a useful tip.
Yeah, definitely. And you talked about networking in general. What advice do you have for students looking to begin networking within their field?
So networking within their fields, definitely professors is the easiest way to start because you are in college and your professors probably either are in that field or know someone in that field. So for example, if I'm an English major and I want to go into publishing, like one of the professors at BU, I think, is a publisher. So I would go to him, build that relationship, even if you're not in the class, because you have college as your structure, great place to start. Another place to start is BU alumni. So if you go on the LinkedIn or if you use BU Connects, any of those platforms, you're directly connected to that person. You're both went to BU, so you can be like, "Hey, you remember like President Brown? Sure." And so you can build a relationship there, and then you can talk about jobs. So my like, don't start networking with people you do not have any connection to or any relation to. It's too nerve wracking. Start with the smallest things. Like for me, networking includes like my friends who graduated and went to work as a teacher. Like that's still networking. You already know them though. So it's a lot easier to ask those questions and figure out those stuffs and build those connections. So definitely professors, BU Connects or any BU alumni. And also if you have an on-campus job or a research lab, your boss, like definitely your boss will be really useful.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for accepting this interview and sharing your story. I think it will definitely be very helpful for a lot of students watching this just because of the career that you are and the fact that you did study humanities, you're an international student. I think those experiences are very valuable and important to take into consideration when looking for a job, especially in the US. And once again, I wanted to say thank you so much. Do you have anything else you would want to add?
No, just good luck. And for international students out there, it's not hopeless. You can do it. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.